The crystal chandeliers of the Maxwell Mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, sparkled mockingly as Isabella Bennett stood frozen in the grand ballroom, her emerald green dress suddenly feeling like a cage around her trembling body. The annual charity gala, which had always been her family's crowning social event, had just become the stage for her ultimate humiliation. "I'm sorry, Isabella," her father, Theodore Bennett, announced with cold detachment, his voice carrying across the stunned silence of the room. "But you are no longer welcome in this family. Your adoption was the greatest mistake of our lives." The words cut through her heart like shards of ice. 25 years of love, of believing she belonged, shattered in an instant. The gathered elite of Newport society whispered and stared, their judgment palpable in the oppressive air of the ballroom. Sarah Maxwell, her supposed best friend since childhood, stood beside Theodore with a triumphant smirk playing at the corners of her perfectly painted lips. The leather-bound diary in her manicured hands, Isabella's private thoughts and dreams, had become the weapon of her destruction. "She's been plotting to take control of the Bennett Foundation," Sarah declared, her voice dripping with false concern. "Planning to expose imaginary corruption, all to take over the charity herself. It's all here in her diary." Isabella's stepmother, Victoria Bennett, pressed a hand to her chest in theatrical shock. "How could you, Isabella? After everything we've done for you? That's not true." Isabella's voice cracked with desperation. "Those are private thoughts about wanting to modernize the foundation, to help more people." "Sarah, you're twisting my words." But she could see it in their eyes, they'd already convicted her. The prestigious Bennett family, known for their philanthropy and social influence in Newport, had already decided her fate. The family that had adopted her as a baby, given her every material comfort but withheld the one thing she truly craved, unconditional love, was now publicly disowning her. Her younger stepsister, Madison, whom Isabella had practically raised after their mother's passing, couldn't even meet her eyes. The teenager shrank behind Victoria, choosing sides in this carefully orchestrated betrayal. "Security will escort you out," Theodore commanded, turning his back on her. "Your accounts have been frozen, and your possessions will be sent to wherever you manage to find shelter." As two suited men approached her, Isabella's mind raced through the events that had led to this moment. The mysterious disappearance of documents from the Foundation's office last week. The whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. Sarah's increasing closeness to her family. It had all been a setup, but why? "Wait!" A voice cut through the murmurs. James Crawford, the Foundation's young legal advisor, stepped forward. "This isn't right. You can't just..." "James, remember your position," Theodore warned, his steel-gray eyes flashing dangerously. "The Bennett Foundation employs you. Choose your next words carefully." Isabella watched as James's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. But he stepped back, and with him went her last hope of support. As security guided her toward the door, Isabella caught a glimpse of her reflection in one of the ballroom's massive mirrors. Her mother's emerald necklace, her only inheritance from the woman who had died shortly after her adoption, gleamed at her throat. With trembling fingers, she unclasped it and turned back to face the crowd one last time. "You can take everything else," she declared, her voice stronger than she felt, "but this stays with me. It's the only true thing I've ever owned in this house of lies." The gasps that followed her declaration gave her a small measure of satisfaction. Victoria stepped forward, hand outstretched, but Isabella had already turned away, her head held high as she walked toward the grand doors. The warm summer evening embraced her as she descended the mansion's marble steps for the last time. The scent of roses from the garden, her garden, which she had tenderly cultivated for years, wafted around her, a bittersweet farewell. Her phone had already been cut off. Her car keys had been confiscated by security. Even her small apartment in the city, paid for by the family, would be inaccessible now. At 25, Isabella Bennett found herself truly alone for the first time in her life. But as she walked down the winding driveway, her designer heels clicking against the pavement, a strange sense of liberation began to mix with her despair. The tears on her cheeks dried in the gentle breeze, and her spine straightened with each step. They had taken everything from her, but they had also, unknowingly, set her free. Free from the constant pressure to be perfect, free from Victoria's subtle manipulations, free from her father's conditional love. As she reached the grand gates of the Maxwell estate, Isabella turned for one last look at the mansion that had been both her heaven and her hell. In the distance, the party seemed to have resumed, light and music spilled from the windows, and the silhouettes of the guests moved on as if she had never existed. "I will return," she whispered to the night air, her mother's emerald cool against her skin. "Not for revenge, but for justice. And when I do, you'll remember this night very differently." With those words, Isabella Bennett stepped out into the unknown, leaving behind the glittering world of Newport society. She had no idea that waiting at the end of the driveway was an old blue pickup truck, and behind its wheel, a familiar face that would change the course of her destiny forever. The old blue pickup truck's engine rumbled in the quiet Newport night, and Isabella's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the driver. Michael Thompson, the Maxwell family's former groundskeeper who had been mysteriously fired 3 months ago, sat behind the wheel, his weathered face etched with concern. "Get in, Miss Bennett," he called out softly, pushing open the passenger door. "Unless you'd prefer to walk 5 miles into town in those heels." Isabella hesitated for only a moment before climbing into the truck. The worn leather seat felt entirely foreign compared to the luxury vehicles she was accustomed to, but somehow more genuine. As Michael pulled away from the Maxwell estate, she caught one last glimpse of the mansion's lights in the side mirror before they disappeared around a bend. "I've been parked here every night for the past week," Michael revealed, his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. "Ever since I overheard Sarah and your stepmother plotting at the Silver Swan Cafe." Isabella turned to him sharply. "You knew this was going to happen?" "I knew something was coming," he sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "But I couldn't warn you without proof." "They're very careful, Miss Bennett. Very careful indeed." The truck wound its way through the prestigious Ocean Drive, past mansions that had once welcomed Isabella as one of their own. Now, their manicured lawns and imposing facades seemed to loom accusingly in the darkness. "Call me Isabella," she said quietly. "I'm not a Bennett anymore." Michael's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "You're more of a Bennett than any of them. Your real mother would have been proud of how you handled yourself back there." The mention of her birth mother sent a jolt through Isabella's body. "What do you know about my mother?" The truck slowed as Michael pulled into a quiet street lined with modest homes, a part of Newport that Isabella had rarely visited. He parked in front of a small blue cottage with white trim and a well-tended garden. "More than your father ever wanted you to know," he replied, turning off the engine. "But first, you need a safe place to stay, and my wife Mary has already made up the guest room." The cottage's warm yellow light spilled onto the porch as Mary Thompson opened the door. She was a petite woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair, wearing a simple floral dress and an apron that smelled of freshly baked bread. "Oh, you poor dear," Mary exclaimed, hurrying down the porch steps to embrace Isabella. The simple human contact broke something inside her, and Isabella found herself crying in the arms of a virtual stranger, her composure finally crumbling. Inside, the cottage was modest but immaculately kept, with handmade quilts draped over comfortable furniture and family photos covering the walls. Mary sat Isabella at the kitchen table and pressed a cup of chamomile tea into her trembling hands while Michael disappeared into another room. "Your mother, your real mother," Mary began hesitantly, sitting across from Isabella, "was my best friend." Isabella's teacup clattered against its saucer. "What?" "Catherine Pierce," Mary continued, her eyes misting with memories. "She was the most beautiful soul I've ever known, inside and out. We worked together at the Bennett Foundation before it became what it is today." Michael returned, carrying a worn wooden box. He placed it gently on the table in front of Isabella. "We've been keeping this safe for 25 years, waiting for the right time." With shaking hands, Isabella opened the box. Inside, she found photographs of a stunning young woman with her same auburn hair and green eyes, letters written in elegant handwriting, and a leather-bound journal. "Catherine was the foundation's head of accounting," Michael explained, sitting beside his wife. "She discovered something in the books that troubled her deeply. Something about missing funds and offshore accounts. She was going to expose it," Mary added, reaching across to squeeze Isabella's hand. "But then she had you, and suddenly everything changed. She became afraid." Isabella lifted a photograph of her mother holding a newborn baby, with the Newport mansion visible in the background. Did Theodore know her?" The Thompsons exchanged a loaded glance.
Knew her?
Michael's voice was heavy with implication. Isabella, Theodore Bennett was in love with her. But he was already married to his first wife, Margaret. The revelation hit Isabella like a physical blow.
Are you saying?
You're not adopted, Isabella, Mary said gently.
You're Theodore Bennett's biological daughter.
Catherine was your mother, and the adoption story was fabricated to protect the Bennett family's reputation.
The room spun around Isabella as decades of lies unraveled in her mind. The cold treatment from Victoria, who must have known the truth.
The strange comments from elderly society members about how much she resembled Margaret Bennett, who had supposedly died before her adoption. The mysterious circumstances of her mother's death just months after her birth.
What happened to her? Isabella whispered, though part of her dreaded the answer. Michael's face darkened. The official report said it was a car accident. Single vehicle, late at night, off Ocean Drive. But Catherine was terrified of driving along the coast. She never would have taken that road willingly.
The night before the accident, Mary added, pulling a sealed envelope from the box, she gave me this. Made me swear I'd keep it safe and give it to you when you were old enough to understand.
But then everything happened so fast, and you were adopted so quickly. We've been watching over you from a distance all these years, waiting for the right moment.
Isabella stared at the envelope, her mother's elegant handwriting spelling out "For my dearest Isabella" across the front. Inside, she found a letter dated just days before her mother's death, along with a small silver key. My darling daughter, the letter began, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. The truth I've discovered about the Bennett Foundation cannot be ignored, but I will not risk leaving you alone in this world. I've hidden proof of everything in a safe place, secured with the key I've enclosed.
Trust no one in the Bennett family, my love.
They will say I abandoned you, that I was troubled or unsuitable.
Know that every breath I
took was for you, every choice I made was to protect you. The letter continued, but Isabella's tears made it impossible to read further. Mary moved to comfort her, but Isabella stood abruptly, pacing the small kitchen. All these years, she said, her voice shaking with anger and grief, they've been living with this lie.
Watching me search for information about my real parents, all while knowing the truth.
And now they've pushed you out because you were getting too close to discovering everything on your own, Michael concluded.
Sarah Maxwell must have found something in your diary that spooked them.
Isabella touched the emerald necklace at her throat, her mother's necklace, she now realized, not Margaret Bennett's as she'd been told.
The foundation files I was reviewing last week, the ones that went missing. I found discrepancies in the offshore accounts.
History repeating itself. Which means the proof your mother hid 25 years ago could expose not just past crimes, but current ones, Mary said thoughtfully. Isabella gripped the silver key tightly, her mind racing with possibilities.
Then that's where we start.
Whatever my mother found, whatever she hid, it's time to bring it all to light. Michael stood, his expression determined. I may not work at the Maxwell estate anymore, but I know every inch of those grounds.
If Catherine hid something there.
No, Isabella interrupted, a memory suddenly surfacing.
The key? I recognize this pattern.
There's a row of vintage deposit boxes in the old Newport Trust Bank building. Mother used to take me there as a child. I thought it was just to teach me about banking, but she always lingered in the Heritage Vault section.
Mary's eyes widened. Catherine was clever.
Hiding the evidence in plain sight, in a place where the Bennetts would never think to look. Because the Newport Trust merged with their rival bank years ago, Isabella finished, a plan forming in her mind.
They wouldn't keep their assets there.
As if on cue, lightning flashed outside the cottage windows, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The summer storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke, rain lashing against the window panes.
Isabella moved to the window, watching the storm rage outside.
In the flashes of lightning, she could almost imagine her mother standing in the garden, proud and strong, refusing to bow to corruption. Tomorrow, she declared, turning back to the Thompsons, we visit Newport Trust. It's time to finish what my mother started. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, in the study of the Bennett mansion, Theodore Bennett was making a phone call that would put into motion events that would change everything. And in a small cafe across town, James Crawford, the foundation's conflicted legal advisor, was meeting secretly with someone who had their own scores to settle with the Bennett family. The storm was just beginning, and Newport's elite had no idea what was coming. The morning sun had barely risen over Newport's historic downtown when Isabella, wearing borrowed clothes from Mary Thompson, stood before the imposing facade of Newport Trust Bank. The classical stone building, with its weathered columns and brass fixtures, seemed to hold its secrets as tightly as the vaults within. "Are you sure about this?" Michael asked, standing beside her in his most presentable outfit, pressed khakis and a blue button-down shirt. "Once we open that deposit box, there's no going back." Isabella touched her mother's emerald necklace, drawing strength from it. "I've been living a lie for 25 years. I'm ready for the truth, whatever it costs." The bank's interior was quiet, with only a few early morning customers conducting their business. Isabella approached the Heritage Vault section, her heart pounding as she presented her ID and the silver key to an elderly clerk named Ms. Winters, whose eyes widened in recognition. "Little Isabella Bennett," she smiled warmly. "I remember when your mother used to bring you here. You would always ask for a lollipop from my desk." Isabella managed a small smile, though her hands trembled. "Yes, I remember those visits clearly now. I'm here to access her deposit box." Ms. Winters' smile faded slightly. "Of course, dear. Though, I should mention that someone else inquired about this same box yesterday." "A Mr. James Crawford?" Isabella's breath caught. James, the foundation's legal advisor who had tried to speak up for her at the gala. What was his role in all of this? Following Ms. Winters through the security doors, Isabella and Michael entered the Heritage Vault. The room smelled of old metal and paper, its walls lined with brass deposit boxes of varying sizes. Ms. Winters led them to box number 425 and inserted her master key alongside Isabella's. The box's contents were surprisingly simple: a USB drive, a thick manila envelope, and a small velvet jewelry box. But before Isabella could examine them, her phone, a prepaid burner that Michael had purchased that morning, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Don't trust anyone with what you find. Meet me at St. Mary's Church in 1 hour. Come alone. James," Isabella whispered, showing the message to Michael. "It could be a trap," he warned. "The Bennetts could be using him to track you." Isabella stared at the message, remembering the conflict in James's eyes at the gala. Or he could be trying to help. He's been at the foundation for 5 years, maybe he's discovered things too. "Then let me come with you," Michael insisted. "No," Isabella decided, gathering the items from the deposit box. "Take these back to the cottage. Mary can help examine them. I need to know what James wants." After leaving the bank, they parted ways, Michael heading home with the documents while Isabella walked the few blocks to St. Mary's Church. The historic stone building was quiet at this hour, its stained glass windows casting colorful shadows across the empty pews. James was already there, pacing nervously near the altar. He looked different from his usual polished self, his tie was loose, his hair disheveled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Thank God you came," he said, glancing anxiously over his shoulder. "I've been trying to figure out how to reach you safely." "Why are you helping me?" Isabella demanded. "You work for them." "Because I found something," James replied, lowering his voice. 3 months ago, I was reviewing some old foundation documents for a routine audit. I discovered irregularities, massive ones. When I began investigating, I found a pattern going back 25 years. Isabella's heart raced. "To when my mother died." James's eyes widened. "You know about Catherine Pierce?" "I know she was my real mother," Isabella confirmed. "And that her death wasn't an accident." "It's worse than you imagine," James said, running a hand through his hair. "The foundation, it's not just about missing money or offshore accounts. They're using the charity as a front for something bigger. Something international." Before he could continue, the church's heavy doors creaked open. James grabbed Isabella's arm, pulling her behind a column as Sarah Maxwell's voice echoed through the sanctuary. "James? Are you here? Theodore wants to speak with you." James pressed a small flash drive into Isabella's hand. "Everything I've found is on here. Bank records, emails, surveillance footage from the night your mother.
He swallowed hard. Get it to someone who can help. There's a journalist at the Newport Daily News, Rebecca Chen.
She's been investigating the foundation for months. Come with me, Isabella whispered urgently.
James shook his head. I have to go back. They don't know what I've found yet. I can keep them distracted while you. James? Sarah's voice was closer now. I know you're in here. Security saw you enter.
Go, James hissed, pushing Isabella toward a side door. There's a garden path that leads to Thames Street.
Don't let them find you with this evidence. Isabella slipped through the door just as Sarah rounded the column.
Through the stained glass, she heard their muffled conversation.
Sarah. I was just praying. After everything that happened at the gala. How sweet. Theodore will be glad to know you're processing things so spiritually. Now, about those files you were asking about.
Their voices faded as Isabella hurried down the garden path, her mind reeling from James's revelations. The flash drive felt heavy in her pocket, its contents potentially explosive. She was so preoccupied that she almost collided with a man reading a newspaper on a bench. Looking up to apologize, the words died in her throat. It was Detective Marcus Reed of the Newport Police Department, the same detective who had investigated her mother's accident 25 years ago. Miss Bennett, he said slowly, folding his newspaper. I was wondering when our paths would cross again.
Isabella fought to keep her voice steady. Detective Reed. I didn't know you were still on the force.
Oh, I retired years ago, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes.
Now I do private security consulting.
Your father, excuse me, Theodore, is one of my biggest clients.
Isabella's pulse quickened as she noticed two men in dark suits approaching from either end of the garden path. She was trapped.
You know, Reed continued conversationally, your mother was quite troublesome too, always asking the wrong questions.
It seems that curiosity runs in the family.
My mother was murdered, Isabella stated boldly, watching his reaction.
Reed's smile widened. That's a very serious accusation, Miss Bennett. The kind that could get someone hurt. Again.
The suited men were getting closer.
Isabella's mind raced, evaluating her options.
The garden wall behind her was too high to climb, and the church was now compromised with Sarah inside. But then she remembered something from her childhood, the old service tunnel that connected St. Mary's Garden to the neighboring Historical Society building. The entrance was hidden behind a large hydrangea bush, used centuries ago by priests to move between buildings discreetly.
You know what else runs in the family? Isabella asked, taking a step backward. Survival instinct.
She turned and ran, not toward either exit where the suited men waited, but directly at the hydrangea bush. Reed shouted behind her as she dove through the branches, finding the old iron door exactly where she remembered it. The rusted hinges screamed in protest as she yanked it open and plunged into the darkness beyond. The tunnel was narrow and damp, forcing her to run blindly with one hand against the cold stone wall. Behind her, she could hear voices and footsteps, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. But she had the advantage, years of exploring Newport's historical buildings with the Preservation Society had taught her every hidden passage and forgotten doorway. The tunnel forked, one path leading to the Historical Society and another toward the old harbor warehouses. Isabella took the harbor route, knowing it would be harder to follow. What she didn't expect was the figure waiting for her at the tunnel's end, illuminated by the light filtering through the exit grate. "Hello, little sister," Madison Bennett said softly. "We need to talk." As Isabella stared at her stepsister, trying to catch her breath, the flash drive in her pocket seemed to burn with its dangerous secrets. Behind her, Reed's men were getting closer. Above her, the Newport elite continued their daily routines, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath their feet. And somewhere in the city, a journalist named Rebecca Chen was about to receive an anonymous package containing 25 years of carefully hidden truths about the Bennett Foundation, truths that would shake Newport society to its core. The game was changing, and Isabella was no longer just fighting for justice, she was fighting for survival. Madison Bennett stood in the tunnel's dim light, her designer clothes incongruous with the grime-covered walls. At 17, she was the spitting image of her mother Victoria, but there was something different in her eyes, a vulnerability that reminded Isabella of their shared late-night conversations and secret ice cream runs.
"How did you find me?"
Isabella asked, keeping one ear trained on the approaching footsteps behind her.
"I've known about these tunnels for years," Madison replied. "Who do you think I learned them from?"
"You were the only one who ever really paid attention to me, Izzy."
The childhood nickname struck Isabella's heart. "Then you know I need to get out of here." "Reed's men
are working for Victoria, not my father," Madison interrupted, glancing nervously over Isabella's shoulder. "She hired Reed months ago when she first suspected you were investigating the foundation." The footsteps were getting closer. Madison grabbed Isabella's hand and pulled her toward a hidden alcove, pressing a loose brick that revealed a narrow passage.
"The old Rum Runner's escape route," Madison explained as they squeezed through.
"It leads to the harbor." As they navigated the tight space, Isabella's mind raced.
"Why are you helping me?"
"Because last night, after you left, I overheard Victoria talking to Sarah's father, Richard Maxwell. They were discussing something called Project Legacy, something about your mother and how history couldn't repeat itself."
The passage opened into a larger tunnel lit by ancient emergency lights.
Their footsteps echoed on the whetstone as they hurried forward. "I always knew I was adopted," Madison continued, her voice trembling.
"But last night, I found out why.
My real mother was another Foundation employee who disappeared 17 years ago, right after she started asking questions about missing funds."
Isabella stopped short.
"What?" "Her name was Rachel Sullivan. Victoria showed up at the Foundation one day with me, claiming she'd adopted me from a private agency.
But I found Rachel's old employee file hidden in Father's study.
She looked just like me." The implications hit Isabella like a physical blow. The Foundation's pattern of silencing whistleblowers hadn't started with her mother, and hadn't ended there either.
A loud crash echoed through the tunnel behind them. Madison grabbed Isabella's arm.
"They're breaking through the false wall.
We need to move."
They ran, their way lit only by the sporadic emergency lights and the glow of their phones. The tunnel seemed endless, the sound of pursuit growing closer.
"The warehouse district is just ahead," Madison panted.
"There's a doorway that leads to." "Hold it right there."
Reed's voice boomed through the tunnel. A flashlight beam caught them in its glare.
Madison shoved Isabella toward a side passage.
"Go. I'll hold them off."
"Madison, no.
I'm a Bennett, remember? They won't hurt me."
Madison's smile was bitter. "Besides, Victoria's been training me for society life since I was a baby.
Time to put those acting lessons to use." Before Isabella could protest, Madison turned and ran toward the flashlight beams, her voice echoing dramatically through the tunnel. "Detective Reed.
Thank goodness you're here. I followed her like you asked, but she went that way, toward the marina."
Isabella's heart ached as she slipped away, hearing Madison's perfect performance of the dutiful daughter.
She emerged from the tunnel into a forgotten corner of an old warehouse, the salty harbor air filling her lungs. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, Newport Daily News.
20 minutes. Rebecca Chen.
Checking that the flash drive was still secure in her pocket, Isabella hurried through the warehouse district. The morning sun was higher now, casting long shadows between the buildings. She had just turned onto Thames Street when a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down to reveal James Crawford, his face tense.
"Get in. Now." "James? How did you?"
"Sarah bought my performance at the church, but she'll figure it out soon."
"Rebecca's waiting at a safe house, not the newspaper office."
"They're watching that too closely."
Isabella hesitated, remembering Michael's warnings about trust.
But then another black car appeared at the end of the street, one of Reed's men. She jumped into James's car, and they sped away just as Reed's vehicle turned to follow them. "They're not going to let us reach Rebecca easily," James said, taking a sharp turn down a narrow side street.
"The story she's building, it's not just about the Foundation anymore. The Maxwells, the Bennetts, half of Newport's elite families are involved in this." "In what exactly?" Isabella demanded. James checked his mirrors before responding.
Your mother discovered that the foundation was being used to launder money for an international antiquities smuggling ring. But when she dug deeper, she found evidence of something worse: powerful people using charitable donations to fund political manipulation, corporate espionage, maybe even. He didn't finish the sentence as another black car appeared ahead of them, forcing him to swerve down an alley. The evidence, Isabella said, clutching her pocket where both flash drives now sat. It's not just about my mother's death, is it? It's about everything that's happened since, including what happened to Madison's real mother. And others, James confirmed grimly. The foundation's reach goes deep. Rebecca's been connecting the dots for months, but she needed proof. That's why they're so desperate to stop us from reaching her. They emerged from the alley onto Memorial Boulevard, only to find their path blocked by two more black cars. James spun the wheel, the tires screeching as they turned back. There's another way, he said, heading toward the cliff walk. Rebecca's waiting at Fort Adams. We can reach it by water. By water? James, what are you? Her question was answered as he crashed through a barrier onto a private dock, the car skidding to a stop beside a sleek speedboat. Get in, he shouted, already jumping into the boat and starting the engine. Isabella leaped from the car just as Reed's men reached the dock. The boat roared to life, pulling away as gunshots rang out across the water. They're shooting at us? Isabella ducked, her heart pounding. This is Newport, not Miami. Welcome to the real Newport, James replied grimly, pushing the boat to full speed. The one your mother tried to expose. The one beneath the garden parties and charity galas. As they raced across the harbor, Isabella's phone lit up with a text from Madison. They know I helped you. Getting out now. Don't worry about me, I have Dad's private accounts and passwords. Time for some teenage rebellion. Meet you at the safe house. Another message followed immediately, this one from Michael. Mary decoded the USB drive. You need to see this. Your mother left a video message. Isabella stared at her phone, her mother's emerald necklace catching the morning sun. Behind them, more boats were appearing, sleek, black vessels cutting through the waves with obvious purpose. James, she said, watching their pursuers gain ground. I hope you know what you're doing. He managed a grim smile. Honestly? I'm making this up as I go. But I've been keeping evidence too, ever since I first suspected something was wrong. Between my files, your mother's proof, and Madison's access to the accounts. We could bring it all down, Isabella finished, her voice hardening with determination. Not just get justice for my mother, but for Rachel Sullivan, for Madison, for everyone they've hurt. The Fort Adams lighthouse appeared ahead of them, its white tower stark against the blue sky. And somewhere in its shadow waited Rebecca Chen, the journalist who might help them expose decades of Newport's darkest secrets. But first, they had to survive the next 10 minutes. As if reading her thoughts, James gunned the engine. Hold on tight, Miss Bennett. This is where it gets interesting. Isabella gripped the boat's rail, watching their pursuers close in as Fort Adams grew larger ahead. The morning sun sparkled on the waves, deceptively peaceful against the drama unfolding on the water. In her pocket, the flash drives containing 25 years of secrets felt heavier than ever. And somewhere in the city, her stepsister was starting her own journey of rebellion and discovery. The game hadn't just changed, it had exploded into something bigger than Isabella could have imagined. But for the first time since the gala, she felt truly alive. She was no longer just fighting for herself or even for her mother's memory. She was fighting to expose a truth that could reshape Newport society forever. And somewhere, she was sure, Catherine Pierce was watching with pride. The speedboat cut through the waves toward Fort Adams as the pursuing vessels closed in. James handled the boat with unexpected skill, weaving between the morning fishing boats and tourist ferries. Where did you learn to drive like this? Isabella shouted over the engine's roar. Summer job during law school, Newport Harbor tours, he called back with a grim smile. Never thought those skills would be crucial to exposing corporate corruption. A bullet pinged off the boat's hull, making Isabella duck. They're still shooting. In broad daylight. They're desperate, James replied, executing a sharp turn that sent spray over their pursuers. We've got evidence that could expose decades of. His words cut off as a larger yacht suddenly appeared ahead, blocking their path to Fort Adams. On its deck stood Victoria Bennett, her perfect makeup and tailored suit incongruous with the chaos around them. "Stop this foolishness, Isabella," her voice carried across the water.
"Think about what you're doing to this family." "Family?" Isabella stood up, fury overtaking her fear. "Like what you did to Rachel Sullivan." "To my mother?"
She saw Victoria flinch at the names, but then another figure emerged on the yacht's deck, Theodore Bennett himself, looking as composed as if he were at a board meeting. "Isabella," his voice was calm, reasonable.
"Let's discuss this like civilized people. Whatever you think you know." "I know everything." Isabella's voice cracked with emotion. "About Catherine Pierce, about what really happened that night, about Project Legacy."
The mention of Project Legacy caused visible distress on Theodore's face. For the first time in Isabella's life, she saw genuine fear in her father's eyes. James suddenly spun the wheel hard, turning their boat toward a narrow gap between two piers.
"Hold on."
They shot through the gap as bullets sprayed the water around them. Behind them, the yacht was too large to follow, and the pursuing boats had to slow down to navigate the obstacle. But as they emerged on the other side, Isabella saw something that made her heart stop: a familiar blue pickup truck parked near the fort's entrance, its driver's door open and empty.
"Michael," she whispered. "He was supposed to stay at the cottage." James followed her gaze and swore under his breath.
They must have followed him when he tried to reach Rebecca. They docked at a small pier, killing the engine just as a figure emerged from behind the fort's ancient walls, Rebecca Chen, the investigative journalist, looking anxiously over her shoulder.
"Quick," she called out. "Into the fort. They've got people coming by land too."
As they ran through the historic fortress's corridors, Rebecca explained breathlessly, "Your friend Michael arrived 20 minutes ago with a warning. He's safe, I got him out through the underground tunnels. But he managed to show me what was on that USB drive first."
She looked at Isabella with a mix of sympathy and excitement.
"Your mother was incredibly brave and incredibly thorough." They reached a small room deep within the fort, originally used for ammunition storage but now set up as an impromptu office.
Multiple laptops hummed on a folding table, surrounded by stacks of documents. "I've been gathering evidence for months," Rebecca explained, quickly typing on one of the computers.
Strange patterns in charitable donations, mysterious deaths classified as accidents, sudden transfers of longtime foundation employees.
"But I could never prove the connection until..." A loud bang echoed through the corridors. James moved to the door, listening intently. "They're inside the fort." Rebecca quickly pulled up a file on her computer. "Watch this first. It's from your mother's USB drive."
The video was grainy, showing a much younger Catherine Pierce sitting at a desk, her green eyes, so like Isabella's, filled with determination. "If you're watching this, my darling Isabella, then my worst fears have come true." Catherine's voice was exactly as Isabella remembered from her earliest memories.
"Project Legacy isn't just about money laundering or smuggling.
It's about power, the systematic manipulation of charitable foundations worldwide to influence politics, control media narratives, and silence anyone who gets too close to the truth."
More bangs echoed through the fort, closer now. But Isabella couldn't look away from her mother's face.
"The Bennetts, the Maxwells, the Sullivans, all the old Newport families are involved. They use their charitable foundations as covers for a global network of influence and control.
I've hidden proof in multiple locations, protected by people I trust. Michael and Mary Thompson have one piece. This video is another. And the final piece." Catherine smiled sadly. "Well, you're wearing it." Isabella's hand flew to her emerald necklace.
"The stone is artificial," Catherine continued. "Inside is a microchip containing offshore account numbers, transaction records, and names, everyone involved in Project Legacy. I had it made by a friend in the tech industry who owed me a favor. They've been looking for it for 25 years, never realizing it was literally hanging around your neck." The sound of running footsteps grew closer. James barricaded the door with a filing cabinet while Rebecca quickly began transferring files to an encrypted cloud server. "My sweet girl," Catherine's voice cracked with emotion. "I'm so sorry I couldn't be there to watch you grow up. But I know you have my strength, my determination.
And most importantly, you have my heart for justice. Don't let them bury the truth. Don't let them.
The video cut off as gunfire erupted in the corridor outside. James pressed himself against the wall beside the door, grabbing a heavy flashlight as a weapon.
Rebecca frantically typed at her computer. Uploaded 60%, we just need a few more minutes. Isabella touched her necklace, feeling its weight with new understanding.
25 years of secrets, of lies, of carefully hidden truths, all contained in this single piece of jewelry she'd worn every day since childhood.
The door shuddered as someone tried to break through. James's makeshift barricade wouldn't hold much longer.
But then another sound cut through the chaos, police sirens, lots of them, approaching rapidly.
That would be my insurance policy, Rebecca smiled grimly. I have a friend at the FBI's Boston office. The moment I confirmed the evidence on your mother's USB drive, I sent him everything. He's been waiting for an excuse to investigate Project Legacy for years.
The shooting outside stopped, replaced by shouts and the sound of running feet, this time moving away from them. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from Madison. State Police just raided the mansion.
Victoria tried to delete the servers, but I already copied everything. Dad's having a meltdown. Wish I could see his face when he realizes his teenage daughter just helped expose his entire operation.
Another message followed immediately from Michael. Mary and I are safe. Local news is already reporting on raids across Newport.
Rebecca's story just went live online. James let out a long breath, lowering his makeshift weapon. It's really happening. After all these years. Catherine Pierce's last mission, finally completed, Rebecca nodded, watching her computer screen as the upload finished.
By the daughter she died protecting.
Isabella sank into a chair, emotional exhaustion hitting her as the adrenaline faded. I still don't understand everything. Why did they let me stay in the family if they knew who I really was?
Why not get rid of me like they did with my mother? Because of me, a new voice said from the doorway. They all turned to see Theodore Bennett standing there, his expensive suit dusty from the fort's corridors. But he wasn't armed, and his usual commanding presence had crumbled into something more human, more broken.
I couldn't.
He swallowed hard, looking at Isabella with tears in his eyes.
I couldn't lose you too. Even after what I did to your mother, I couldn't bear to harm her child. My child.
So we created the adoption story, kept you close, tried to guide you away from asking too many questions. Until I started finding answers anyway, Isabella finished, her voice cold.
Theodore nodded wearily. Just like Catherine.
You have her spirit, her intuition. I thought I could control it, contain it.
I was a fool.
The sound of approaching footsteps made him straighten up.
The FBI will be here any moment. For what it's worth, Isabella. I'm sorry. For everything.
As federal agents swarmed the room minutes later, Isabella watched her father, her real father, being led away in handcuffs. The man who had orchestrated her mother's death, who had buried decades of corruption beneath a veneer of respectability, finally facing justice. But there was no joy in his downfall, only a profound sadness for what could have been.
Rebecca touched her arm gently. Your mother would be proud.
Not just of exposing the truth, but of how you did it, with intelligence, courage, and compassion. Isabella fingered the emerald necklace, her mother's last gift, her final weapon against corruption.
What happens now?
Now, James said, gathering the evidence they collected, we make sure everyone knows the truth. About Project Legacy, about the foundations, about all of it.
And then? Isabella asked. Rebecca smiled. Then you help me make sure it never happens again.
The story's not over, Isabella.
In many ways, it's just beginning.
As they emerged from the fort into the bright Newport morning, Isabella saw police boats surrounding the Bennett yacht, news helicopters circling overhead, and a crowd gathering on shore as decades of secrets finally came to light. The game had changed indeed. And somewhere, she was certain, Catherine Pierce was smiling.
The week following the raid on Fort Adams transformed Newport's social landscape beyond recognition.
Isabella watched from the Thompsons' cozy living room as news channels broadcasted endless coverage of the scandal that had shaken New England's elite to its core.
Another arrest in the Project Legacy investigation, the TV anchor announced. Richard Maxwell, CEO of Maxwell Industries and board member of multiple charitable foundations, was taken into custody this morning. Sources say his daughter, Sarah Maxwell, is cooperating with federal investigators. Mary Thompson set a cup of tea in front of Isabella. Sarah Maxwell cooperating? Now that's a plot twist I didn't see coming. Survival instinct, Madison commented from her position on the couch, where she'd been staying since the raids. She's doing what she always does, attaching herself to whoever has the most power. Right now, that's the FBI. Isabella sipped her tea, thinking about how much had changed. The grand mansions along Bellevue Avenue, once symbols of Newport's gilded society, now stood eerily quiet as their owners faced federal investigations. The Bennett Foundation's offices were sealed with crime scene tape, and the annual summer gala season had been indefinitely postponed. Her phone buzzed with a message from James, meeting with FBI in 20 minutes. They've found something in the Zurich accounts. Could change everything. Go, Mary urged, seeing Isabella's hesitation. Michael and I will keep Madison safe. The drive to the Newport Federal Building, where the FBI had set up their command center, took Isabella past the Maxwell estate. Crime scene investigators swarmed the property, and she caught a glimpse of Sarah being escorted to a black SUV, her designer clothes replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. Their eyes met briefly as Isabella drove past. There was something different in Sarah's expression, not hatred or anger, but a kind of desperate resignation. Inside the federal building, James waited with Rebecca Chen and Agent Daniel Foster, the FBI's lead investigator on Project Legacy. The Zurich accounts were just the beginning, Foster said without preamble, spreading documents across the conference table. We've uncovered a network of offshore foundations spanning 5 continents. The Bennetts and Maxwells were just the American branch of something much bigger. How big? Isabella asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Global, Rebecca replied, pulling up files on her laptop. Royal families, business tycoons, political dynasties, all using charitable foundations to manipulate markets, influence elections, and silence opposition. And it all traces back to Newport, James added. To a meeting at the Bennett Mansion in 1995. The year before my mother died, Isabella whispered. Foster nodded grimly. Catherine Pierce wasn't the first person to discover Project Legacy, but she was the first to gather concrete evidence. Evidence that's been hanging around your neck for 25 years. The emerald necklace felt heavier than ever. The microchip hidden inside had already provided FBI cybercrime experts with thousands of encrypted files. There's something else, Foster continued, hesitating slightly. We found records of payments, regular deposits to an account in the Cayman Islands, starting the week after your mother's death. The account holder is listed as Detective Marcus Reed. Isabella's hands clenched into fists. He was paid to cover up her murder. And others, Rebecca added softly. Rachel Sullivan, Madison's birth mother, wasn't the only one. We've identified at least 7 suspicious deaths connected to foundations involved in Project Legacy. The door opened, and a junior agent entered with a tablet. Sir, Victoria Bennett is asking to make a deal. She says she has information about other branches of the organization. Everyone's turning on each other, James observed. The whole house of cards is collapsing. Foster's phone buzzed. His expression darkened as he read the message. Theodore Bennett was just found unconscious in his cell. Initial reports suggest attempted suicide. Isabella felt the room spin slightly. Despite everything, the news hit her hard. James moved to steady her, his hand warm on her shoulder. He's alive, Foster added quickly. But this shows how desperate they're becoming. We need to move fast to secure the remaining evidence. There's more, Rebecca said, turning her laptop to show them a breaking news alert. The Maxwell Estate's grounds are being searched. They found something in the garden. Isabella's breath caught. The garden she had tended for years, the roses she had planted and pruned. What did they find? A hidden vault beneath the greenhouse. Decades of physical records, photos, letters, contracts. Sarah Maxwell led them to it. Madison, who had slipped into the room unnoticed, spoke up from the doorway. That's why she was always so possessive of the greenhouse. She knew what was underneath it. Madison. Isabella started. You should be at the cottage. I'm done hiding, Madison declared.
Rachel Sullivan was my mother, and I want to help expose the people who killed her.
Sarah's not the only one who can cooperate with the investigation. Foster studied Madison thoughtfully. Your access to the Bennett household accounts has already been invaluable. But are you sure you want to dive deeper into this? The truth about your mother. I need to know, Madison insisted. Everything. A commotion in the hallway drew their attention.
Agents were rushing toward the entrance, and through the glass walls, Isabella saw a familiar figure being escorted in, Detective Reed, his usual smugness replaced by obvious fear. They found him trying to board a private plane to the Caribbean, an agent reported. Reed's eyes locked onto Isabella as he passed the conference room. Miss Bennett, he called out, straining against the agents holding him.
We can make a deal. I know things about your mother, about what really happened that night.
Take him to interrogation, Foster ordered sharply. As Reed was led away, Isabella felt a strange calm settle over her.
I want to hear what he has to say.
Isabella, James protested.
You don't need to. Yes, I do.
She stood straighter, touching her mother's necklace.
I've spent 25 years not knowing the full truth. I need to hear it, even if it's painful. Foster considered for a moment, then nodded. We'll set up a formal interview. But first, there's something you should see.
He led them to another room where tech experts were analyzing the contents of the emerald necklace's microchip. On a large screen, they watched as encrypted files were decoded, revealing a web of connections that stretched across decades.
Your mother didn't just find evidence of criminal activity, Foster explained. She uncovered the entire philosophical framework behind Project Legacy. These people believed they had the right, the duty, to shape society according to their vision. The foundations were their tools, charity their cover story. And anyone who threatened to expose them. Madison's voice trailed off.
Became a liability, Rebecca finished softly. Isabella studied the complex diagrams on the screen, the lines connecting foundations, corporations, and individuals into a vast web of influence and control.
How did they keep this hidden for so long?
Money, James replied.
Influence. The power to make people look the other way. Until now. Foster's phone buzzed again.
Victoria's lawyer just arrived. She's ready to talk. I want to be there, Isabella said firmly.
Me too, Madison added. Foster looked between the two young women, daughters of victims, now become advocates for justice. All right.
But remember, Victoria Bennett is a skilled manipulator.
Don't let her get under your skin.
As they walked to the interview room, Isabella felt the weight of the moment. She was about to face the woman who had helped orchestrate her mother's death, who had raised her in a web of lies, who had tried to destroy her when she got too close to the truth. But she wasn't the same person who had stood trembling in the Maxwell Mansion's ballroom a week ago. She was Catherine Pierce's daughter, carrying her mother's final mission in the emerald around her neck and her spirit in her heart.
Ready? James asked softly as they reached the interview room door.
Isabella squared her shoulders.
Ready.
Inside, Victoria Bennett waited, her perfect composure finally cracking around the edges.
And as Isabella took her seat across the table, she saw something she'd never expected to see in her stepmother's eyes. Fear. The interview was about to begin, and with it, the final unraveling of Project Legacy's darkest secrets.
Victoria Bennett sat across the interview table, her manicured fingers tapping an irregular rhythm on its surface. Her designer outfit, usually immaculate, showed signs of her recent detention, a slight wrinkle here, a loose thread there. Small imperfections that spoke volumes about her falling empire. Before we begin, Victoria said, her voice still carrying that familiar aristocratic tone, I want assurances about my cooperation.
Agent Foster placed a recorder on the table.
The U.S. Attorney's Office has agreed to consider your level of cooperation during sentencing.
That's all we can offer. Victoria's eyes flickered to Isabella and Madison. And why are they here? This isn't some reality TV drama.
They're here because they've earned the right to know everything, Foster replied firmly.
About their mothers, about Project Legacy, about all of it. Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a crack in her perfect facade. Very well. Where should I begin?
The night Catherine Pierce died, Isabella said, her voice steady despite her racing heart.
Tell me everything. Victoria took a deep breath. It wasn't supposed to end that way.
We just wanted to scare her, to convince her to leave Newport.
Theodore, your father, he truly loved her, you know.
Even after marrying me, he never stopped. But she found out about Project Legacy, Madison prompted. She was brilliant, your mother, Victoria admitted, looking at Isabella.
Too brilliant.
She traced the foundation's donations through dozens of shell companies, uncovered connections we thought were perfectly hidden. When she confronted Theodore with evidence, he panicked.
We all did.
Project Legacy was still in its early stages, one wrong move could have destroyed everything.
So you had her killed, Isabella's voice was ice. No.
Victoria's composure cracked further. We hired Reed to intimidate her, to convince her to take a payoff and disappear.
But Reed, he was overzealous. When he forced her car off Ocean Drive that night, it wasn't supposed to go over the cliff. He was just supposed to scare her.
Isabella felt James's hand slip into hers under the table, offering silent support.
And Rachel Sullivan?
Madison asked, her young voice tight with emotion.
Was that another accident? Victoria's face paled.
Rachel was different. By then, Project Legacy had grown beyond Newport.
The stakes were higher. When she started investigating discrepancies in the international accounts.
You killed her and took her baby, Madison finished.
Made me your replacement daughter when you couldn't have children of your own. I gave you everything. Victoria protested.
The best schools, the best opportunities. You gave me a life built on my mother's murder, Madison cut her off.
Just like you tried to do with Isabella. Foster leaned forward. Tell us about the international connections.
The other families involved in Project Legacy. Victoria's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but she waved him off. It started as a simple idea, using charitable foundations to influence policy, shape public opinion. The Bennetts and Maxwells were just the beginning. Soon, families from Europe, Asia, the Middle East, they all wanted in. The foundations were perfect covers for moving money, buying influence, eliminating threats.
And the greenhouse vault? Rebecca asked, taking notes rapidly. The record Sarah exposed? A bitter smile crossed Victoria's face. Sarah Maxwell.
Always playing both sides, just like her father.
Those records, they're only a fraction of what exists.
The real archives are scattered across the globe, protected by people with everything to lose if they're exposed.
We'll find them, Foster assured her. Every last document. Victoria's laugh was hollow. You have no idea what you're up against. Project Legacy isn't just about money or power. It's about controlling the narrative, shaping society itself. The foundations, they're just the public face.
Behind them are intelligence agencies, corporate giants, political dynasties. All built on lies and murder, Isabella said quietly.
Built on necessity, Victoria countered.
The world needs order, structure.
Someone has to maintain that. By killing anyone who threatens your control? Madison's voice cracked. Like our mothers? Victoria fell silent, studying the two young women before her. You really are their daughters, she finally said.
The same fire, the same righteousness. I saw it in you both, growing up.
It terrified me. A knock at the door interrupted them. Another agent entered with a tablet. Sir, Theodore Bennett is awake. He's asking to speak with his daughter.
Isabella felt her heart twist. After everything she'd learned, after all the pain and betrayal, part of her still responded to the word father.
You don't have to go, James said softly. Yes, I do. Isabella stood. But first, she turned to Victoria. The night of the gala, when you exposed me in front of everyone, was any of it true? Was I really planning to take over the foundation?
Victoria met her gaze.
No. But you were getting too close to the truth. Just like your mother. We needed to discredit you before you found what she left behind. The necklace, Isabella touched the emerald. You never suspected that Catherine would hide her evidence in plain sight? On her daughter's neck? Victoria shook her head. She outplayed us all, even from beyond the grave. As Isabella turned to leave, Victoria called out, Isabella. I did love you, in my way. You and Madison both. But Project Legacy, it was bigger than any of us.
Love doesn't murder mothers and steal their children, Madison replied coldly, following Isabella out. The hospital wing of the Federal Detention Center was heavily guarded. Theodore Bennett lay in a hospital bed, looking smaller and older than Isabella had ever seen him. The man who had commanded Newport society with an iron grip now seemed fragile, diminished. Isabella, he reached for her hand as she approached. She let him take it, feeling the weakness in his grip. My daughter. My real daughter. Why? The question that had burned inside her for so long finally emerged. Why didn't you protect her? You claimed to love her. I did love her, Theodore's voice was rough with emotion. But Project Legacy, it was like a drug. The power, the influence. Once you're part of it, there's no walking away. When Catherine threatened to expose everything, you chose the project over her. Over me. I chose wrong. Tears slid down his cheeks. I've spent 25 years choosing wrong. But keeping you close, watching you grow up so much like her, it was my punishment and my blessing. Isabella withdrew her hand. Did you know? About the necklace? Theodore closed his eyes. No. But it's exactly the kind of thing Catherine would do. Hiding the truth in something so precious, so personal, knowing that a mother's gift to her daughter would be the last place we'd look. Mr. Bennett, Foster interrupted from the doorway. We need to discuss your role in Project Legacy's international operations. Of course, Theodore sighed. Isabella. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But know that despite everything, you were the one true thing in my life. You and your mother, you were real. Everything else was just power and lies. Isabella stood, her mother's emerald catching the fluorescent light. Goodbye, Father. In the hallway, James waited with Rebecca and Madison. The FBI's organizing an international task force, he reported. Raids are being planned across 3 continents. The evidence from your mother's necklace, it's going to bring down some of the most powerful people in the world. Sarah Maxwell's testimony is just the beginning, Rebecca added. More people are coming forward every hour. The whole network is unraveling. Madison touched Isabella's arm. What do we do now? Isabella looked at her stepsister, no, her friend, her ally in this fight for truth. We finish what our mothers started. We make sure Project Legacy can never hurt another family. Her phone buzzed with a message from Michael. Mary found something else in your mother's files. Another message, meant for after the truth came out. Come home when you're ready. As they left the detention center, the setting sun painted Newport's mansions in golden light. But Isabella saw them differently now, not as symbols of power and privilege, but as monuments to secrets and lies, to mothers lost and daughters who refused to be silenced. You know, James said as they drove back to the Thompsons' cottage, your mother's last message, it wasn't just about exposing Project Legacy. It was about you, about believing you would be strong enough to finish what she started. Not just strong enough, Madison added. Good enough. Kind enough to seek justice, not revenge. Isabella touched her necklace, feeling its weight not as a burden now, but as a connection to her mother, to the truth, to the person she had become through all of this. The game had changed indeed. But the real story, the story of daughters reclaiming their mother's legacies, of truth triumphing over power, of love surviving beyond death, was still being written. And somewhere, Catherine Pierce was watching her daughter become exactly who she was meant to be, unstoppable. 3 months after the fall of Project Legacy, Isabella stood in the garden of the Thompson cottage, watching the autumn leaves dance in the October breeze. The roses she had transplanted from the Maxwell estate were thriving in their new home, much like she was. Mary Thompson emerged from the cottage with 2 steaming mugs of coffee.
Ready for today? Isabella accepted the coffee gratefully. As ready as I'll ever be.
The past months had transformed Newport's social landscape beyond recognition. The FBI's International Task Force had uncovered Project Legacy operations in 12 countries, leading to hundreds of arrests and the seizure of billions in assets. Charitable foundations worldwide were under scrutiny, and a new era of transparency was emerging from the ashes of corruption. Isabella's phone buzzed with a news alert. Sarah Maxwell testifies before Senate Committee on Foundation Fraud. The accompanying photo showed Sarah looking almost unrecognizable in a simple blue suit, her former society queen confidence replaced by somber determination. She's really going through with it, Madison said, joining them in the garden. At 18, she had spent the past months diving deep into her own mother's history, working with investigators to piece together Rachel Sullivan's final days.
People can surprise you, Isabella replied, thinking of her own journey. Sometimes it takes losing everything to find your true self. James's car pulled into the driveway, followed by Rebecca Chen's SUV.
The investigative journalist had turned the Project Legacy exposé into a Pulitzer-nominated series, shining light into the darkest corners of international philanthropy. The renovation crews are ready, James announced as they gathered in the cottage's living room. The Bennett Foundation building will be completely transformed by spring. The decision to convert the foundation's headquarters into a Truth and Reconciliation Center had been unanimous among the survivors and families of Project Legacy's victims. The building that had once housed so many secrets would now stand as a testament to transparency and justice. Your mother's final message, Mary reminded Isabella gently.
Are you sure you want to watch it now? Isabella nodded, touching the emerald necklace, now emptied of its hidden evidence but still precious beyond measure.
Michael brought out the old wooden box containing Catherine's last gift to her daughter. The gathered group watched as Isabella inserted the final USB drive they had found hidden in her mother's files. Catherine Pierce's face appeared on the screen, but this message was different from the previous one. She was smiling, at peace. My dearest Isabella, Catherine began, if you're watching this, then the truth has finally come to light. Project Legacy has fallen, and you, my brave, beautiful daughter, have finished what I could not. Tears slid down Isabella's cheeks as her mother continued, but this message isn't about secrets or corruption. It's about love, the love of a mother for her daughter, a love so strong that not even death could silence it. You see, my darling, exposing Project Legacy was never the end goal. The real legacy I wanted to leave you was the courage to stand up for truth, the strength to remain kind in the face of cruelty, and the wisdom to choose justice over vengeance. Madison squeezed Isabella's hand as Catherine spoke about Rachel Sullivan, about the other victims of Project Legacy, about the hope that their children would someday unite to heal the wounds of the past. The emerald necklace served its purpose, Catherine continued, but its real value was never in the evidence it contained. It was in keeping a piece of my heart close to yours, reminding you that you were never truly alone. The truth may have been hidden in the stone, but love was always visible on the surface. The message continued with Catherine sharing memories and hopes, mother to daughter, across the divide of years. When it ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. She knew, Isabella whispered. She knew that someday we would all be here, that the truth would bring us together. Rebecca closed her notebook, setting aside her journalist's objectivity for a moment of human connection. Your mother's story, all of your stories, have changed how the world views power and privilege. The question is, what happens next? Isabella stood, moving to the cottage window. Below, Newport Harbor stretched out under the autumn sun, the mansions along the cliffs now symbols of a fading era. We rebuild, she said firmly. Not just the foundation, but trust itself. Madison and I have been working on a new model for charitable organizations, complete transparency, community oversight, real measures to prevent abuse of power. The Sullivan Pierce Foundation, Madison added. Named for our mothers, dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and supporting families affected by corporate corruption. James produced a folder of legal documents. The paperwork's ready. We can launch as soon as you're ready. There's something else, Michael spoke up. Mary and I have been thinking. The cottage is too big for just us now that our kids are grown. We'd like to donate it to the foundation, as a safe house for others who need to start over. Isabella hugged the Thompsons, overcome with gratitude for the couple who had protected her mother's truth for so many years. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Agent Foster entered, his face grave but satisfied. Theodore Bennett has agreed to a full confession. In exchange, he's offering to help us track down every last member of the Project Legacy Network.
And Victoria? Madison asked. Cooperating too, though less willingly. Sarah Maxwell's testimony hit her hard. The Society Queen facade finally cracked.
Isabella touched her mother's necklace, thinking of the long road that had led to this moment. "What would you think, Mom?" she whispered.
About forgiveness, about moving forward?
As if an answer, the autumn breeze stirred the roses in the garden, their fragrance drifting through the open window, a reminder that beauty could bloom even in the aftermath of storms. "The hardest part of losing your mother," Mary said softly, "is not being able to share your triumphs with her."
But Catherine saw this day coming.
She believed in you, in the power of truth, in the strength of a daughter's love. The group spent the rest of the afternoon planning the Foundation's launch, drafting proposals for reform, and sharing memories of the women who had sacrificed everything for truth. As the sun set over Newport, casting long shadows across the transformed landscape of power and privilege, Isabella felt a deep sense of peace. Her phone buzzed one last time, a message from Sarah Maxwell, meeting with prosecutors tomorrow.
Ready to tell everything. Thank you for showing me there's life after losing it all. Isabella smiled, thinking of how far they'd all come from that night at the gala.
The society princess, the angry teenager, the conflicted lawyer, the determined journalist, all transformed by the pursuit of truth, all united in the quest for justice. "You know what this means," Madison said, reading the message over her shoulder.
"It's really over."
"Not over," Isabella corrected gently.
"Just beginning.
Our mothers left us a legacy of courage and truth. Now it's our turn to build something lasting, something real." As twilight settled over Newport, Isabella stood in the garden one last time, the emerald necklace catching the day's final light.
She thought of Catherine Pierce and Rachel Sullivan, of secrets hidden and truths revealed, of power corrupted and justice restored.
But mostly, she thought of love, the kind of love that could hide evidence in a necklace, that could wait 25 years for the right moment, that could transform pain into purpose and loss into legacy. "We did it, Mom," she whispered to the evening air.
"We became unstoppable."
The roses nodded in the breeze, their petals catching the last golden light of day. And somewhere, two mothers watched their daughters build a new kind of legacy, one founded not on power and secrets, but on truth, justice, and love.